Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a big approach.
Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for April 16th, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. If you're watching us on YouTube and you're wondering why I'm in a cave, it's because I am helping Tony Stark build his new arc reactor.
You're helping to build
This time it's going to be
Ultron?
green. Yeah, this time it's going to be green. Inspired by the Hulk. So that's what's going on here in my little lab.
I think most watchers on YouTube, seeing that green background, seeing the movie that we're reviewing here, might think, you guys saw Wicked already?
Exactly. Yeah, just block out the little Letos part, and it's just Wicked, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Yeah.
I was going to say, being visited by the Wicked Witch of the West right now, aren't you?
Yeah, no, it's very, like, I got the green mood lighting, which I usually always have, but I also have like a little light here so you can see, my face as you do when you're on camera. And it turns out that I'm having a little bit of a technical glitch. So my computer is dying or was dying.
Yeah.
So I had to plug it in. Usually I have a workaround where I can have it plugged in and the light on at the same time. For whatever reason, that's not working tonight. So I had to plug in my computer, my laptop, so we can record the conversation here.
Dedication.
That means I'm lightless and in my cave building the green arc reactor. So that's what's going on here.
We are jokingly, or not even jokingly, maybe we should do this. Make it a point that every time you put that ambiance up there, it's actually going to suggest how we feel about a certain movie. There is an ambiance to it. There is like a moodiness to it. It almost suggests negativity in a way.
A little bit. I can change the colors. I typically go with green because that's our branding, but I can change the colors to whatever we want the mood to be.
I guess what I'm trying to say is if we're ever going to do this going forward and we want green to be kind of ominous and moody, as if to suggest maybe like a mood, maybe to suggest a certain type of response or a review that we're about to have. I don't know if Wicked Little Letters is the greatest starting point for that. Maybe you should have it as pink or something like that.
Yeah, I know. Well, I think that's what's interesting about Wicked Little Letters. We'll get into it, but it has perhaps a small backbone of cynicism, but on its face, it's not ominous and brooding. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, no, I'm really interested to get into Wicked Little Letters. It's a film that I honestly was not all that aware of, and then was able to get my hands on a screener and had access to it, was able to watch it. And for reasons we'll get into, it's, I don't know, surprised me a little bit. So perhaps we can get into the film. I'm curious, anyone out there watching, if you've seen the film, if you've even heard of it, because again, for me, I certainly wasn't aware of it until recently. Okay. Wicked Little Letters is directed by Thea Sharrock, and it stars Olivia Colman, Jessie, Buckley, Anjana Vasan, and a few others that come and go throughout the film, including Timothy Spall, who is in the film as well. Yeah. If you're not familiar with Wicked Little Letters, as I was until recently, when people in Littlehampton, including conservative local Edith, begin to receive letters full of hilarious profanities, rowdy Irish migrant Rose is charged with the crime. Suspecting that something is amiss, the town's women investigate. All right, let's jump into this. Brendan, what did you think about Wicked Little Letters?
Well, I should say for those hoping for a sequel to The Lost Daughter, you're not going to get that just because Olivia Colman and Jessie Buckley are in the same movie again.
You have to, that comes to mind immediately because that was just 2 years ago that came out.
Well, the only difference here is that we actually get them on screen together.
They're on screen together. Yeah, they're not separate.
During screen time, they're actually communicating with each other. They're two completely different characters, and they do have some great banter. This movie is so British. This movie is so British. Like I had the first, like I wanted to say that, but I had to first look up that Thea Sharrock was actually British and she was born in London, so I don't feel like out of base saying that. But yeah, the movie just has such a British tonality. The humor is very British, and I think what surprised me the most, and I'm sure you're going to talk about this as well, JD, this just works as a fun comedy. As a comedy, I think this movie is really worth seeing. It has a vulgarity to it that I didn't really expect, and it really embraces that pretty much head on. These letters that are, part of the title and that plot synopsis that you talked about there. What's written down in these letters are certainly enough to make people pass out in this day and age that it's taking place in.
Yeah.
And I do think that's a fascinating idea, like this embrace of profanity and how cathartic that it can be in a time when it's so frowned upon. If there really is any subtext to this movie, it's to showcase that abrasiveness in language at a time when, at a time when women were starting to be seen a little bit differently. This very deliberately takes place during the suffragette movement. So it's very much about a time when, it was a transitional point for women specifically.
Yeah.
And portraying it in that way, I think is certainly interesting. It might not go much further than that, but if the film is at least entertaining, it doesn't need to. And I do think the film is mostly entertaining, especially when it kind of becomes this weird quasi heist film by the end that I was kind of into. So yeah, I do think it's a lot of fun. There are a few things that happen at the midpoint that I also want to talk about, and how it treats maybe the central mystery of who is writing these letters. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that as well. But yeah, as simply just a comedy, I very much enjoyed this. I watched it with my wife, and she pretty much ate up any scene where a letter was read out loud. And it really is quite fun to watch that reaction and to laugh with it as well.
Yeah, I think I enjoyed this film. It was such a massive surprise because I knew nothing about it. I ended up reading a bunch more after seeing the film and realizing that this is indeed based on a true story.
Right.
Now, obviously, they did condense it a little bit for movie purposes, but the idea that this actually happened in some way, shape, or form, that in and of itself is hysterical.
That's kind of a character here. Yeah. I mean, because they open up the movie in a way that doesn't just simply say based on a true story. It actually has a little bit of fun with the way it tries to tell you that this is kind of exactly how it happened, but maybe not. It's it almost has a weird like Fargo-like tinge to it. So
sure.
It's definitely aware of that.
Yeah, and it is hysterical. I laughed my ass off to this crazy little movie. And a lot of it does boil down to Olivia Colman in the way she reacts to the vulgarity of these letters, especially that first time, because when you walk into this film and you know nothing about it, okay, the film is titled Wicked Little Letters. What does that entail exactly?
Yeah.
And it's not long. It's a few minutes into the film. You get the shot of Olivia Colman's character, of Edith, sitting down at this table with her parents, mind you. She's with her parents, at very conservative parents, at this table. And I believe it's her father, played by Timothy Spall here. He reads this letter, and it is extremely vulgar. And it caught me off guard. And you get those reaction shots of Olivia Colman, and they are just bliss. It is pure comedic gold, and I loved it. Like I nearly fell off my seat like that. Like
it's
the
a
way
tone
that's
setter. It really
edited.
is a tone setter.
It is so good, so good, and I love how it sets the foundation for what it's going to be comedically in that regard. And you contrast that to Jessie Buckley's character in this film of Rose, who is the epitome of these letters, tonally speaking, right? Like she is very crude and very crass and has no filter whatsoever. And it's easy to see why they would immediately think of Rose as being the culprit of these letters, and how the film goes about depicting that battle of who did it, how they come out to find out about the truth, which is where the Gladys character comes in, played by Anjana Fasan here. And I thought it was all handled diligently. The film isn't trying to win Oscars, obviously. It's not the most dense movie, but as far as telling a story that is so insane that it's hard to believe that it's real, and using that as your crux from a movie perspective, comedically and dramatically, I think the film absolutely nailed it in that regard. Had a lot of fun while giving it a little tinge of pathos as it relates to Rose and the humanity of that character, that she's not just this crassness all the time. Like there's something kind of behind that the film unravels, and how Gladys is involved. Again, given the state of the time, as you noted earlier, in women becoming more prominent in these societal roles, and Gladys is a police officer in this town and trying to be involved in this investigation. But of course, there's a lot of hurdles. There's,
and she always has to identify her. She always has to identify herself as a female police officer.
Yes.
Right.
Woman police officer.
Woman police officer.
Yeah.
So it definitely is a reflection of the times. You're right. This is not the kind of movie that dissertations are going to be written about from a historical standpoint. But at the same time, I do think there's an interesting, I guess, allegory happening here to showcase the difference between a woman and a lady at this time. And really the only reason why Rose is accused of writing these letters is because she doesn't behave like a lady. That's really the only evidence they have. But she is still a very strong and prominent woman. She's a very dedicated mother to her daughter, and those scenes with her daughter, I think are very endearing.
Really great.
Yeah. So this is what I love about Jessie Buckley's performance, is that she's hilarious and has this vulgarity that she fully embraces. But she might not make the right choices all the time. I mean, no human really does, but her heart is mostly still in the right place. So you still have the side of a confident and strong woman, even if she's not behaving like a lady in the, I guess, societal definition of a lady at this time. And I think it's really interesting to see that that's really the only evidence that anyone in this town has that Rose is the one that's doing this. So like, I guess without getting too far into it, that's obviously going to lead audiences to believe, okay, so then there's a bit of a whodunit here. And I think it's safe to assume, okay, well, of course it's not going to be Rose, because that's kind of the whole point of this. We do get a reveal later on who's doing this. And I don't know, do we talk about that in depth, JD? I might need to. I don't know.
Honestly, it's interesting because maybe there won't be dissertations written on this film, but I do think there are some compelling, there is interestingly some compelling analysis to be had regarding how this film goes about divulging its characters and its comedy, how it weaves all of that, because it is quite assiduous in that regard. And I think one of the more interesting elements in that regard, which to your point, why we might need to talk a little spoilers here, is that it doesn't wait till the ending of the film to reveal who the culprit is. We get that actually, halfway through the film?
I think timing wise, it might be exactly at the midpoint. It's almost like it was timed perfectly.
Yeah, absolutely. So I find that fascinating. Like a lot of mystery whodunits certainly do not do that. And as a comedy in that regard as well, like I think that actually amplifies some of the comedy we get, because by knowing who is behind it, it gives new angles to the humor that wouldn't be there otherwise. And we're less focused on the whodunit, the mystery of it, because the film doesn't want to be a whodunit at its core. It is a comedy at its core. So how do we examine this story? How do we demonstrate these letters in a way that doesn't become stale? Well, we could simply read out the letters every time and hope that audiences don't become
Yeah.
a little
kind of numb to the
the crassness of it.
Yeah.
Or we reveal who it is and give it a different angle. And that's what it does. And I thought that was actually kind of a brilliant choice here.
I think it does. It also does a good job getting away from the usual pitfalls of a mystery like this, because we're dealing with a pretty small group of characters when you really only have maybe 2 or 3 potential, I don't want to say suspects, but you as a viewer, you don't really have many people to count on to guess who's going to be the culprit here. So by revealing it earlier in the process, it gives you as an audience member less time to really dissect the mystery, try to uncover the mystery. So then you find yourself more distracted by the red herrings, and then all of a sudden the reveal happens. And I will say the reveal of who is actually doing it, when I say it's obvious, I mean that it's obvious because it makes the most sense that it was this person.
Yeah.
But in the moment, I didn't get the chance to predict this person. So and I don't know if you did. I don't know if the thought came to your mind that this was the individual that is writing these letters. But I didn't have enough time to really think about it in the moment to find myself landing on this person. I was too busy distracted by the red herrings in such a short-term process that I think the movie does a good job kind of speeding its way to that reveal and allowing you to focus more on the tricks as opposed to the reveal. So I think it's smartly handled as far as the mechanics are concerned. And then, I don't know, do we reveal who it is? Because
we can do spoilers. We
might need to.
You know, it's up to you. I feel like I think
I need to, because like the biggest reservation I have about the movie is something that happens as a result of who is actually writing these letters.
Okay.
So
before we reveal, can I quickly speak to the build up to the reveal real fast?
Please do.
Because I wasn't too surprised by it.
Okay.
I don't know if I accidentally stumbled upon this. I might have, to be honest, because I wasn't looking for it. Obviously, there is the mystery of who is writing these letters. That's pretty clear early on in the film. And dramatically speaking, from a plotting perspective, it's all about, well, who's writing these letters? Yeah. And of course, it's got to be Rose. Yeah. To what we've been saying. However, in the midst of all of that, the film does leave clues. Yeah. That I wasn't looking for. I wasn't looking for the clues. But I happened to notice a detail or two that made me think, oh, I have a suspicion as to who it is. So when the reveal came, it made total sense to me. Yeah. And I wasn't too thrown off by it. And honestly, I kind of loved that's what it was. Sure. Because, again, not only does it give space for the comedy to manifest itself in a slightly different way, but it also recontextualizes the relationship between said character and Rose, and how the film goes about depicting that battle, that dynamic between them. I think is really funny and awkward and weird. I kind of like the hero / villain dynamic that basically turns it kind of turns this into a warfare movie, a psychological warfare movie. So I think the dynamic between these two actors, so we're speaking vaguely here, we haven't said who it was yet, but the dynamic between these two specific actors, I think is fun to watch after that reveal comes. I think that both actors certainly play into it very well. Absolutely. Even though we've been somewhat vague here, it's probably not too hard to put it together. So let's just go ahead and get into it. Yeah. Spoilers for the rest of this conversation. You cast Olivia Colman and Jessie Buckley for a reason. Yes. For a reason. You want that dynamic. And not only are they neighbors early on, and so you see the contrast between conservative Edith and extremely crass Rose, that it only makes sense that Edith is the culprit, which she is. That's the reveal. We find out that Edith is the one writing these letters. I think that's hilarious. I love the idea. I really do. I think it makes perfect sense. And I think there's also another potential layer to make Edith more interesting.
by suggesting perhaps she's really just acting out in response to her incredibly conservative father, specifically. That maybe this is her way of suggesting, you made me this way, Dad, and I'm actually not sure I even agree with it anymore. So there's almost like a vengeful side to that against her own family, which I think is kind of interesting. I feel like there are layers to make Edith kind of complicated. One thing I am wrestling with, and I would love to get your thoughts on this. The reveal comes at the midpoint, as we're saying, and it comes as we watch Edith write a new letter. Yeah. This specific letter, it does something in particular that I kind of wanted the movie to wrestle with a bit more. Okay. If we're in spoilers, we'll just say it. This letter literally kills her mother. Literally. And the movie doesn't really address the ramifications of what she did. So because of that, I was kind of sitting there thinking, are we now supposed to see Edith as maybe the most evil woman of the 21st century in movie form? Like, because that makes her character so much more evil for me. And I don't know if that was intentional. I just I don't know. It's a reservation I have that I'm still scratching my head over.
That was one of the more compelling elements of the character for me. Absolutely. Okay. And I think it's because, they establish early on that they don't even really want her mother to hear these letters. They even joke, or there's a reference that it's going to be the death of her. If these letters keep calling, we've got to find the culprit. We got to put a stop to this because it's going to be the death of her. They do speak to that early on. So it speaks to not just how, I guess, dampening her father had been on her, but I think it absolutely implies that her mother is a part of that as well. Now, the conflict between Edith or with Edith, is perhaps channeled more at her father. That becomes evident as the film goes.
Yeah, but it's more direct in that way.
We do see that her mother is extremely conservative as well. She can't bear to hear this language. And that implies that her mother's conservativeness played a role.
She's just as complicit in that regard.
She's just as complicit. And as a coping mechanism, as a way to express herself, to be cathartic, she starts writing these letters. And it is interesting to me. There is a complicated layer that it does end up killing her. And I do think the film, it certainly could have done more, to your point. I agree. But I think it does enough to demonstrate total remorse. Like she gets the letter, immediately throws it in the fire. I don't even want this to be seen at all. And in the immediate aftermath, you do see the grief on the character. And so there is this interesting conflict of these letters were cathartic. It was a way for me to express myself because of how my parents had formed me in a way that was against my identity, but I went with it anyway. So there's something clearly there, but it did lead to this horrible situation that I do think is there, that is in the performance and in those immediate scenes with the funeral and everything we see there. Like, she is broken over it. Again, it could have done more, but I at least appreciate that there is some interesting nuance there as far as, okay, I wrote these letters. It's certainly, something that I needed. I didn't intend for this to happen, and it led to the death of my mother, which, you do see the heartbreak there. You momentarily, maybe not long enough, but it's there.
It's very momentarily. And you mentioned the word immediate, and I think that's very apt in describing where I'm a little bit, kind of on both ends of the spectrum here. That grief that she does, that she does provide, and we're able to sense that, it is pretty fleeting. By the time that it's done, we're now back to the usual mechanics of Rose versus Edith.
Because we got to get to a trial. Like there's the whole trial we got to get to.
We got to get to a trial. So by the time that we're now asked to understand Edith's point of view again, I'm also sitting there thinking, I mean, technically, you're still kind of a murderer. So it's like, it's kind so again, that makes her fascinating. And I appreciate the cynicism of that. But I don't know if the movie is asking us to have a sense of sympathy still for her, then I don't know if that's earned then, because I don't know if we spent enough time in that grief to really justify that polarity. And I think there's enough there to still be okay with where it goes, because I weirdly also somewhat respect the mean-spirited nature of that very thing.
No,
so I'm kind of like defending it, but also criticizing it simultaneously.
No, I don't think you're wrong to feel that way, and I don't know if we're meant to wholly empathize with Edith, even regardless of what happens to her mother.
Yeah,
she slanders or libels, I guess, is the more appropriate term.
Better. Yeah.
Maybe a little bit of both, because she also speaks vocally to how this is Rose. At one point, she demands an apology.
Yeah.
Demands an apology. You know, I want to be friends. I demand an apology, knowing fully that she is the one doing it.
Yeah.
So, like, she is going after Rose. She's trying to undermine Rose and put an innocent woman in jail. Like, even if you take her
that's
mom
pretty
out of the
evil.
picture,
That's very evil.
That in and of itself is horrible. Absolutely. So, like, I do think the movie wants us to empathize with Rose and
certainly more than Edith.
Justice for her. Even before we get to the reveal, there's certainly an inclination of Rose is innocent. Jessie Buckley does a really great job of tapping into that. Sure, she's crude, but she's innocent. And, you know, to the point where I think it's interesting, because earlier we mentioned how Rose is certainly an outlier in this town, but there is something to be said about how there's still a humanity there. You do see it with those scenes with her daughter, but it's indicative also in the sense that two women bail her out of jail, even though they don't really know the truth. They suspect that she's innocent, but they don't know fully, and yet they still bail her out of jail. And I think that speaks to how they do see the person underneath the facade. And so I find that interesting. And of course the film does a pretty good job of giving Rose even more layers as it goes, in terms of her backstory, what drove her to this town, why she made the choices that she did. I mean, there is a little bit of a tragedy there, and it creates some conflict with her daughter that I think is interesting. And so much of that conflict is born out of, it's a little bit of Anatomy of a Fall, and how you go to trial and all of these secrets are unraveled publicly, and you have to wrestle with that.
Yeah.
That's what makes Anatomy of a Fall so great. And there's seeds of that here, because Rose's life could have continued as is with her secrets, and no one probably would have betted to die. Yeah. But when that has to be exposed publicly because there's a trial, now there's conflict, and that only happens because of Edith, only because of the choices, the selfish motives of Edith. So her mother removed, I don't think there's a ton of empathy to be had, even though I do think it's interesting how she goes about expressing herself, if that makes sense.
It does. And it basically turns this into kind of a superhero movie in some ways, like between hero versus villain, and Edith being the clear villain here. So anything that happens around her father and her upbringing, or really just her parents in general and her upbringing, that's really the villainous backstory to justify why Edith is the way she is. So we might understand her motivations, even if we don't agree with them. So then so then we lead to this, not only this courtroom, as you're talking about, that do have some pretty interesting comparisons to Anatomy of a Fall, but this sort of heist-like sequence that happens involving following this letter into a particular mailbox to prove a point. It's almost like this version of a third act action climax.
Yeah.
So then Rose becomes this hero that represents that transitional point of how women were represented at this time. So women could then be seen as women instead of just ladies, societal ladies. So in some ways, her actions become kind of like this form of liberation at the time.
Yes.
And again, it's kind of on the nose. It's nothing deep, nothing that transcendental or anything like that. But taking it at face value is a fun little movie. I think that there are some interesting ideas there.
And again, maybe not dissertations, but some interesting analysis, because I do think the film gets to have its cake and eat it too in that regard.
Sure.
Because like any villain, there's something there to give us a way into that character.
Right.
Perhaps, it might not justify her actions, but we do understand her to some degree. And I do love that the film gives us that.
Yeah, and understanding is not necessarily the same thing as condoning. In fact, often it's condoning. Not. And that's the case here.
Absolutely. But given her upbringing and how hampering that would have been, she needed an outlet. Now, she channeled that in the wrong way, but to your point regarding the time period in which this takes place, the suffragette movement, what that meant for women, it is liberating in this fascinating way. And I do love how that is depicted in those final scenes between Edith and Rose, where they're somewhat cordial in the way they kind of express themselves verbally. Like they have it's like a rap battle, but
it's
but
like
more
polite,
friendly,
very polite impoliteness.
like they kind of go back at each other like in a fun way. Like they're kind of being vulgar at each other in this fun way. And this is after their conflict, after the court and trial and all that stuff. I think it was like right after the court trial and everything.
Yeah, they're like passing each other in a hallway or something like that. Is that
it's just really like, I just love how all of that crystallizes there at the end, where you don't wholly empathize with Edith, but you understand her, like her motives, like the foundational feelings of, I have to express myself because this is too containing. We all understand that. And there's righteousness there. She just goes about it in the wrong ways. And that's where she becomes the villain, as you're talking about. Like if we're looking at this like a blockbuster villain, Edith is written within the same formula, where at least with good villains, it's that same formula, but it also is representative of women coming into their own at the, like, I feel like the film gets to have its cake in it too with Edith in that regard.
Yeah, I think it does as well. And I also love the middle ground that Anjana Vasan has to play as women police officer Gladys Moss. There is a little bit of backstory involving her and her father that I wish we could have delved more into, because it's very thin. And that certainly feels like it's victim of a movie that needed to be constrained to the near 90-minute mark. And this is a very brief film. But I do think her performance is very good. And I like the middle ground that she plays, and that sense of understanding and trusting a woman whose behavior should seem very untrustworthy at this time. And it makes sense that she would be the one to trust her being Rose specifically, given Gladys's own mistreatment in the police force as a woman. She's looked down as someone that should just be filing paperwork and not be in the field. So it makes sense. Again, it's pretty obvious, but it makes sense that she would be the one to represent that pawn, or not even that pawn, but that cog in this circulating wheel.
I agree. No, I had a lot of fun with that. You're right. There isn't anything particularly innovative about that character or how it's woven into the film on a thematic level, but it's still really compelling. Like it's interesting, and it's a part of the whole women trying to find their place at this time, and she earnestly wants to be a part of this investigation, but they want to dismiss her. They don't take her seriously. It's certainly nothing new in that regard, but I think in execution, and again, we speak to this all the time, it's not what it's about, it's how it's about. And I think the how it's about here is really fun. Like, I love how she gets together with those other women at the end of the film,
it's
how
fun. The dialogue is kind of biting
themes
here.
Yeah. All of that, to me, I had a great time with it.
Yeah, and I want to give credit to the dialogue even further by Johnny Sweet, who, and I'm looking at Johnny Sweet's filmography as a writer, and it's very little. I think there's only 6 credits here, and I've seen none of these, and mostly it comes down to television is where their work is prominently represented. But I think the screenplay here is pretty sharp, honestly, and I like the brevity of it as well. It gets to its point right away. So there is something to be said about a movie that's not necessarily trying to be deeper than anything but this, and simply capitalizes on a sense of humor to provide its point. We don't see that very often. Movies that have a very important sociopolitical point to make, but they do so with a sense of fun, as if to not educate you at all about it. It's just more so the tone it's trying to set, because it realizes that we as an audience, we know enough about this. We live in a certain time that we can dissect our own points from this, and it's going to be the right point. So let's have a little bit of fun with it.
I agree. The film knows exactly what it is. It takes itself seriously just enough, but mostly wants to have fun. It wants to be vulgar and crass. But as we noted earlier, there's also a tinge of poignancy to it as well. It's just a solid movie. And I don't know, I think maybe it's also heightened to me because in recent years, it feels like a lot of these based on true stories, biopics, a lot of them have just been not good.
Well, they're either not good or they just reek of self-importance.
Yes.
And this is not that.
This is not that.
It knows it's important, but it doesn't focus on the importance. And that makes all the difference.
Exactly. And that, I think, is a really astute point, because this could have had the tone of the movie Suffragette. I forget who directed that, which was a fun movie. I didn't.
It was okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not trying to dismantle that film or say that it's bad.
There are time and place for movies like that. Movies like that need to come out. We hope they're good.
Agree.
But they don't always need to be that. Otherwise, you just find yourself lost in a giant needle, or you're a needle in a giant haystack then.
Yes.
So here's a way for a movie like this to have a similar point to make, but now it can stand out.
Exactly. Where Suffragette, the movie, was totally trying to, capture a much more dire tone,
right?
And, have a gravitas to it. This is wholly antithetical to that. Now, it's trying to capture the same essence in a lot of ways, at least regarding women of that time, but it understands that this story at its core is just insane and silly. Like these letters are hilarious. Like you read them or you hear them out loud and they're really funny. It's really like you can't make a serious movie about that. It has to be funny.
No, and it's really a joy to listen to them being read aloud. Yeah,
exactly.
Especially from people who have no business reading that kind of language, that's why these performances are so strong, and not just from Olivia Colman as Edith. And she has more layers to balance because she was raised by a very conservative household, but maybe wants to shed those beliefs a little bit and just physically can't, given the surroundings around her. It's also Timothy Spall as just one of the meanest and most just ugliest men I think I've seen on screen in a while, and he plays into it. He is having a ball, and the way he reacts to these letters. I mean, he's having a spall. Yeah, nicely said. But he's very good in that regard too.
I agree. No, he's a little unsettling in his performance. Like he's really good at playing out the old conservative. The men are in charge and you have to listen to what I say no matter how old you are, because Olivia Colman, God love her, she, isn't young. I don't know how old the character is supposed to be, but,
I'm guessing in her 40s or something like that.
I mean, even when you're in your 40s and living with your parents, you're supposed to behave and act like you're a child. At least that's how he interprets it. Like that's
and she still has this innocence to her, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think because of how she's been so confined her whole life, outwardly she might be in her 40s, but internally she's 17 years old. And that immaturity comes out wonderfully in those letters.
Yeah.
And that's what makes the character so complicated and great. Like on its face, it is this comedy. It's not reinventing the wheel narratively, but I think it's really well thought out in terms of its structure. It embraces
there are layers
what it
still
is.
here.
Absolutely, and there's still nuance to it. Like this is the classic. It's not what it's about; it's how it's about. Like the execution here is vibrant. It's fun. It captures the tone perfectly, and I love that ending. Like those last exchanges between Rose and Edith, I think are perfect. Like they're just a ton of fun, and I think are representative of both of those characters and where they end up here.
This is the kind of movie I think we can recommend to just about anyone.
Yeah,
and I like when movies like this come out because you and I both know this, Judy. We often do this. We'll talk about movies that you and I love, but that doesn't necessarily mean we recommend them because we know certain movies are not for certain audiences, let alone everyone, right?
Yeah.
I can't tell you how much I love the movie Red Rocket from Sean Baker, and I don't think I've ever recommended that movie to anybody.
Exactly. No, I hear you.
Yeah. But then sometimes we can celebrate movies like this where it's like, I just want everyone to watch it. It has a universality as far as how charming that it is. Certain movies just have that spell, and I think this one has it.
I agree. I really like it. I highly recommend it. I urge people to go and check it out. It was a really nice surprise.
Sure.
And I honestly, I would watch it again tomorrow if I had the time.
I did want to write down some of those letters and actually have them in my back pocket just to see if I can say out loud in a real life scenario.
Good stuff. Really good stuff. Any final thoughts? I think that pretty much covers it.
Good movie.
I liked it a lot as well. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say, if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment below. You can always reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. You can email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please rate and review us there. It really helps out the show quite a bit. And I believe that is it.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
That's it. Keep going green, JD. Keep going green.
Keep going green. Do you have any final thoughts on anything before we get out of here?
No, I'll say it again. Keep going green.
Keep going green.
And to make it even more fun, don't go green when we actually talk about Wicked later this year.
I'm going to have to make it extra green. I'm going to put like a bunch of more lights in here. It's just going to be all green and a floating head of me.
You just make a giant green screen and don't fill it with anything.
It's weird. Like I don't like on YouTube here, like the green screen and how it meshes with people. It just, I don't know. I don't love it.
Yeah, I think that's
not my
fair.
thing.
I think that's fair.
I much prefer. Maybe this is the pretentious art side of me that just like, how often have we criticized movies for being CGI messes and soups? I like the practical tangibility of my background.
Well, it's not even just that. It allows it to feel more lived in, for one thing, and it allows your personality to showcase as far as how you actually decorate your home and your room. It's like the background says a lot about me, and this is also how it looks when I'm actually just inside it living it. So it does all of that at once, and I love that. Like I could pick up that bass guitar back there as much as I want. It's not there for show. It's actually there.
Exactly. It's there. There's a practical use for it.
Yeah.
At any rate, we hope you enjoyed the conversation. Earlier this week, we also released a review for Civil War. We hope you enjoyed that as well.
Yep.
A24 Draft. That was on the main show this week, so be on the lookout for that. Or go check it out, rather. That is up. It's available. It's live right now, so go and check that out.
Yep.
And stay tuned for the main show this week. And we have an announcement to make, as long as Brendan doesn't let me forget again. So
it's always my fault. It's always my fault. That's why he's going green. He's angry.
I'm so angry. I'm hawking out here. All right. At any rate, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. That was a wicked good time.
Oh, the vulgarity.
Wickedy wicked.